Hello everyone, Just Podcast TV is here. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified on new contents.
Episode 111, Reborn. Tell me, whose idea was it? As soon as they'd returned to the cave, James had begun grilling Vanessa, Katie, and Krista. It was obvious he was really angry. But these were three strong, capable women. Although they appreciated his leadership, they were not afraid to make their own decisions, and this had been one of those cases. It was my idea, Krista said. I asked them to come with me. Actually, Vanessa broke in, I insisted that we go find you. Katie jumped in next. That's not right. I was the one who told Krista to bring the gun and take us out to look for you. We were worried about you. James was not surprised at all. When faced with his anger, they were all willing to assume responsibility for their collective actions. That kind of loyalty was rare these days. He couldn't help but admire them more than ever. It's a good thing everyone is fine now, he said. If something had happened to you tonight, I would never have been able to live with myself. The three of them walked over and hugged him tightly. Although he was a tough man, how could he resist their gentleness and care? He finally let go of his anger. In reality, anger was the wrong way to describe how he felt. It was more that he was worried about their safety. Now that the matter was settled, Krista finally got around to the question burning in all their minds. Where did you get this equipment? She asked. The question brought him back to the extraordinary events of that day. But rather than focus on the reward he'd received from the system, he deftly diverted to another subject. I almost forgot, he said. Look, I have something for you guys. He brought out the cookies and bread he'd carried back from the yacht. But that only deepened their curiosity. Krista looked at the food and asked, Where did you find such things on the island? Her beautiful eyes shined with unprecedented brightness. It was obvious that she was already putting the clues together. James must have encountered someone from off the island. He distributed the bread and cookies. There was so much to tell them, he didn't know where to begin. Eat while I talk. We still have much to do before we leave this place. That caught their attention. The light in their eyes became like stars in the night sky, and they all began speaking at the same time. What? Leave this place? We can leave this island? When? How? Did you encounter a merchant ship? James still wanted to maintain the suspense, but he was having a hard time keeping quiet. Well, no, I didn't bump into a merchant ship, but I did touch a boat. Before he could finish his words, the women let out a crazy scream and again all spoke at once. Ah! We're saved! We're saved! We can finally leave this godforsaken place. They rushed over and smothered him with hugs and kisses. They did not care what type of ship James had encountered, as long as it could bring them away from this desolate island. That's all that counted. After the wave of excitement subsided, Vanessa said impatiently, What are we waiting for? Let's go! Let's go now! Do you want to eat something first? James asked. We can leave after that. But they were bursting with impatience. No need. We have plenty of stamina now. We can eat while we walk. James had wanted them to rest for a while to recover their strength before leaving, but now it seemed like he was overthinking things. Okay, he said. Let's go. I'll tell you what happened on the way out. Another worry had crept into his mind. More pirates could be out there, and they might regain control of the yacht. Therefore, he wanted to get back to the vessel as soon as possible. The group followed the course of the river downstream toward the bay. It was a moonless night, and the wind was high. Fortunately, James had taken this route when he'd returned, so it was not difficult for him to lead the way. As they walked, he told them all about his unbelievable day. Climbing mountains, pirates materializing from the sea, boxes of gold and silver, exploding grenades, sniper duels. It was like an action story from a pulp novel. When the women learned that the yacht anchored in the bay was their yacht, that was the last straw. It was all so amazingly coincidental. As for the military gear, he naturally couldn't reveal anything about the system. Fortunately, it was easy to invent a tale about taking it from the pirates. For Vanessa, Katie, and Krista, the sense of mystery surrounding James only deepened. But all of that could wait for another time. Their greatest motivation right now was to move with all speed to the yacht and finally get off this island. They arrived at the edge of the forest at dawn. When they saw the yacht sitting quietly on the sea in the distance, it was like a mirage. James signaled them to stay put. He set up the Barrett sniper rifle and observed the yacht through its scope. Once he confirmed it was safe, he left the women at the tree line by the beach and slowly swam out to the boat. He approached it again with an abundance of caution. After he boarded, he checked the entire vessel inside and out before returning to the deck and beckoning to the women. By the time everyone was aboard, the sky had already started to brighten. But the feeling of returning to their yacht after their ordeal on the island made them feel as if they had been reborn. Vanessa, Katie, and Krista sat out on the deck, almost in a daze. They still couldn't quite believe it was true. James went straight to the cockpit and set a course for Blaha Island, Madagascar. Episode 112. I Have a Plan. Inside the cockpit, Vanessa looked at the dozens of bullet marks on the windshield in front of her. That terrifying night the pirates had hijacked their yacht was still vivid in her mind. But her pent-up anxiety was slowly slipping away on the ocean breeze. The yacht under their feet was driving them toward a new future. The sun rose red in the hazy east, and the deep blue sea appeared even more magnificent. After the claustrophobia of the densely forested tropical island, they were in awe once again of the beauty of the open ocean and yearned for the journey ahead. James set the yacht's engines to flank speed. Although he now had serious firepower to defend themselves, he was still worried that more pirates could be out there. He checked the fuel gauge and found that there was still enough to reach their next destination, Blaha Island, Madagascar. Krista, Katie, and Vanessa remained in the cockpit with James, but they were soon overcome with fatigue. They hadn't slept the entire night. He told them to go to their cabins to rest. He was tired too, but he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep, not until they were out of the danger zone. After the women retired to their bunks, James had a strong urge to contact Scott Parker and his parents in New York. He had been out of touch for so long, he knew they would be worried sick, and who could blame them? Vanessa, Krista, and Katie felt the same. They wanted to contact their families as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the pirates had taken or wrecked all of the communication devices on the yacht. For good measure, they'd even destroyed the marine GPS unit. James guessed that they were worried the location software on all these devices would give away their position after they'd seized the yacht. Fortunately, the rest of the ship was still functioning normally. What do you think this is? A couple of hours after they'd set sail, Vanessa came to the cockpit bearing a document bag. She held it out to James. He frowned and asked, "Well, did you look inside it?" "I only took a quick look," she said. "It seems to contain some sort of plans. I couldn't understand all of it." "Where did you find it?" he asked. "It was in a drawer in my cabin." She handed the bag to James as she spoke. "I'll take a look later. Now go get some rest. You look like crap." She kissed him on the cheek and went back to her cabin. James set the controls on autopilot, then opened the bag and flipped through its contents. He was shocked by what he'd read. "I finally understand," he said. "What do you understand?" He hadn't heard Krista enter the cockpit. "I thought you were sleeping," he asked. "I can't sleep," she said. She walked over and hugged his arm. "I want to be with you." Unlike Vanessa, he did not try to persuade Krista to rest. Some of the documents were in Arabic, and he knew she was not fluent, but at least familiar with the language. James handed one of the documents to her. "Can you understand any of this?" he asked. She started to read it carefully. When she was through, she looked at him in surprise. "You're not going to believe this. It turns out that the secret room under the villa on Coney Island was constructed by the pirates." James just nodded. "I do believe it," he said, then told her about the tense encounter in front of the villa when they'd arrived. "But here's the strange part," he added. "One of the pirates I killed yesterday was the second in command of the group that day. He was the guy with the dreadlocks I told you about." Krista gave a slight gasp. "So it was no coincidence that we were robbed at sea. They had their eyes on us the whole time." I think you're right, he said. Together they pored through the documents. Some were in Arabic, but many were in English. They couldn't believe what they were reading. It was a detailed conspiracy plan. Reading between the lines, James and Krista were able to piece together the background. This group of pirates indeed came from the Somali Peninsula, but after losing a power struggle to a real pirate force in the region, they moved their operations farther east into the Indian Ocean. At first, they drifted on the sea all year round, looking for targets of opportunity. Eventually, they set ashore on the Maldives. There, they started small, robbing dumb tourists for a living. Later, they graduated to bribing local government officials so they could establish a more substantial criminal network on the archipelago. The basement and underground tunnel under the big villa on Coney Island was just one element of that network. They used it to move stolen booty, weapons, drugs, and other contraband on and off the island. It was just a coincidence that the system had awarded the villa to James. Unfortunately, it was also why he'd appeared on the pirates' radar. Before James and the ladies had even arrived on the scene, the government of Maldives had started pushing back more and more against the pirates. They soon had no choice but to find new places out of which to operate. That was when they discovered the nameless island in the middle of the Indian Ocean that James had obtained from the system. Their plan was to establish a secret base there. Unfortunately, the documents also showed that they'd gathered a surprising amount of intelligence on James after the encounter at the villa. Even worse, they saw him as a threat. They wanted him dead. Krista gave him a worried look. I'm afraid they won't let us go now that they have a price on your head. What are we going to do? James nonchalantly tossed the document he'd been reading onto a seat and took the helm with both hands. Don't worry, he said with a mysterious smile. I have a plan. Episode 113. Did I do something wrong? What are you going to do? Krista asked. It's simple, James said. The pirates were foolish enough to record their plan so clearly. I will send these documents to the government of the Maldives. It will provide everything they'll need to arrest them, and we will be rid of them forever. Krista agreed with his plan. Good idea. James put away the documents and stroked her face. Go back to your cabin and get some rest, he said. You look exhausted. No thanks, she replied. I want to stay here with you. You look tired too. I'll keep you company. James had no desire to engage in a battle of wills with her. All right, he said gently. I appreciate the help. Krista was pleased with his acceptance. Although she was very tired, she was sensible enough to know that they needed to share the burden of getting the vessel safely to Madagascar. Vanessa and Katie did as well. 3 hours later, they entered the cockpit to relieve James and Krista so they, too, could get some rest. They worked in shifts like that over the next few days. By the time the yacht was close to Blaha Island, the four of them finally were relaxed and rested. At noon, the sea was calm and peaceful. The group lounged lazily on the deck. Looking at the boundless water and sky, they felt as if they had returned to the carefree days when they had first gone out to sea. Having escaped death multiple times, it felt like a second life. Katie suddenly patted James on the shoulder and pointed. Look, she said excitedly. Everyone looked where she was pointing and saw a huge whale breaching out of the blue sea. It landed heavily on the surface, creating a tremendous splash. Vanessa clapped her hands and shouted like a child, Oh my God, a whale! Although they had spent so much time at sea, this was the first time they'd seen a whale. It was magnificent. Krista spoke up. If I'm not mistaken, that's a humpback whale. Looks like there's a school of them, James shouted. The group stood at the rail and enjoyed the show. One after another, massive humpback whales breached from the sea, smashing back down with tremendous splashes. It was a rare sight. James ran back to the cockpit, pushing the throttle to max, then set the yacht on autopilot and quickly returned to the deck. He knew the whale's migratory path ran past Madagascar, so he planned to follow them as long as they could all the way to their destination. Just like that, in 2 days the group arrived at Blaha Island. The pod of humpbacks had long since disappeared, but the pleasure of their exclusive whale-watching cruise lingered with all of them. It was 10 o'clock at night when they'd caught sight of land. They looked at the island in the distance in disbelief. Brightly lit, it shimmered like a diamond under the night sky. They couldn't wait to dock. Arriving at Blaha Island meant they had returned to civilization. It seemed to take forever for the yacht to reach the marina. The moment they stepped onto the dock, their bodies practically trembled with joy. James spread his arms in excitement. "We made it," he shouted, then actually got down on his knees and kissed the wooden pier. The three women laughed and hugged each other, oblivious to tourists looking at them curiously. But so what? James didn't care. Vanessa, Katie, and Krista didn't care. None of these people could possibly understand what they were feeling right now. The joy of escaping the crushing burden of living on a desolate island, of escaping death at the hands of marauding pirates. James exchanged some of the cash the pirates had left on the yacht for some local currency. Then he hailed a taxi to bring them straight to the Masodero Hotel. According to the system notification, the hotel was now his property, and it just so happened to be his next mission spot. On the drive to the hotel, James asked the driver what he knew about it. The cabbie said it was one of the few high-end hotels on Blaha Island, comparable to the best five-star international hotels on the mainland. When the taxi pulled up in front of the Masodero Hotel, James gave it an appraising look, recalling the other hotels they passed on the way. Compared to those, the Masodero was indeed much more high class. It would probably be closer to a 3-star hotel on the mainland, but he didn't care about that now. He led the women straight into the lobby and up to the front desk. "Good evening," he said politely. "I need 4 rooms, please." "I'm sorry, sir," the desk clerk said. "It's the peak of whale watching season on the island. We are completely booked up. I apologize for the inconvenience." James was disappointed that the owner, him, couldn't get a room in his own hotel. But the young woman was right. This was the busy season. It wasn't unusual for there to be no rooms. He had no intention of making things difficult for the clerk, whose name tag read Kaya Koza. He smiled and asked, "Miss Koza, can you call your manager out, please? I'd like to speak with him." Apparently his tone was a little too formal. She looked at him with uncertainty, wondering if he was going to make a scene. At that moment, a man in a dapper linen suit emerged from a back office area. "We do not appreciate tourists bullying our people," he said sternly. James assumed he was the manager. He looked at the guy and thought, "Did I do something wrong?" He could not understand the man's aggressive reaction.